Have you considered writing down your family history? Most people have. Most people honestly have thought about it and said, someday I'm going to write down my family history. I'm going to write a story. I'm going to write a memoir. So why haven't they done it, or why haven't you done it? So today we're going to talk about how to write down your family history, how to make it entertaining for everyone, and what might be some of the reasons that are keeping you from doing it, and how we can maybe help you get over those obstacles today.
You have a story to tell, but you don't know where to start. Let me show you how to free your story. I teach you how to write and how to dig deep in your soul to release your story and make a difference in the world.
Welcome to the Julia Amante channel for Just Meeting. I am Julia Amante and I'm a women's fiction author. I'm here on Fridays to give you a few writing tips to help you to complete your story, your book. So today we're going to talk about writing family histories. I just finished doing that last year, which was not really a history, right? It was not really a memoir. It was a fictionalized story. The title of the book was Let Us Begin. And what I did was consider writing it as a family history. I also considered writing it as a memoir and decided that no, because I'm a fiction author, I am going to actually create it as a work of fiction using real events in order to create my story. And it worked for me, but that, there are different ways to do it. It doesn't have to be the same for everyone. But what keeps people really from actually sitting down and doing it? Writing down their story, writing down the story, their family story, the history. Well, there's a number of things. One, first of all, is that writing is hard, right? So it takes a lot of work to actually sit down and type up all those words and get the story down. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of time spent alone, a lot of time spent thinking, spent researching, spent talking to people. And although it sounds awesome, a lot of people don't really want to do the work or don't have time to do the work. Another reason is that they just don't know where to begin, right? So they want to do it, but they're like, well, where do I start? How do I actually start writing this story? And so that can keep people, right? Because sometimes what you don't know can stop you from moving forward. Other things is that they might be afraid of offending family members. Like, can I really write that story? Can I really tell that that event happened? And so they're afraid that they're going to offend people that they love, and maybe even people that they don't like, but they don't want to offend them. So that can keep them from writing that story down. Research itself can keep people from moving forward. Just thinking of going through tons of documents, of interviews, of spending all that time. So the actual research, maybe it's not the writing itself. It's like the writing I could do, but do I want to do all that research to get all the facts and all the information down? And a lot of people are like, well, I don't really want to do all that. So again, maybe another thing is really just the time. They would do it, but they don't have the time. Or, lastly, and probably not lastly, but another, the last reason that I thought of was that they think that maybe nobody will care about it. Like, I'm going to go through all this work, I'm going to write down this whole story, but no one will really care to read it. Nobody in my family, nobody out in the real world. So, why go through all that work if nobody's going to read it? So what I'd like you to do is actually put a big X over all of those reasons, because you're going to find it so rewarding to actually go through the writing process of actually going through the stories and writing it down, that none of those reasons are really going to matter once you start writing the stories, once you start taking those notes and creating the story. It's really a rewarding process that all of those reasons kind of go away once you begin. Like, at first, when you're first thinking about it, it sounds daunting, but then eventually you're really happy, especially when you finish the whole thing. It's rewarding to have that volume of documented stories down in one place that people really will be interested in reading. At least your family members will. And it's fun to write an intriguing story that, again, is a reward in itself, to be able to share your story with your family history with others. So how do you do it in an interesting way, right? Because what we really want is we want to attract those readers to our story. So the reason probably that you want to write a family history, a family story, is because some interesting things happened in your history, right? In your parents' history, your grandparents, and You want to tell those stories because they were interesting. You think people can learn from them. You think that they would be intrigued. They would find out some interesting historical facts. So that's typically why we want to write it, because it was just, wow, it's like nobody would believe this happened in my family, right? So if that's the case, then you want to, make sure that you do it. So where do you start? You start with doing the research, which doesn't sound like the fun place to start, but it's a good place to start. However, what you don't want to do is have like a chronology of facts, just dumping all these facts that you find. So I want you to research, I want you to write things down, I want you to find documents, I want you to find photographs, I want you to do some interviews, I want you to take notes on those interviews. I want you to just discover everything that you think you know and the things you think you don't know. And then take all that stuff, sift through it, look at it, find out what maybe contradictory things people believe happened in the past. Maybe look at things that you didn't actually even know that happened, right? As you're looking through, oh, like, wow, this person was married to this person and I didn't even know it. Or, look through all of the things that, all of those facts, all of those details. And then you're going to disregard most of it. And no, I don't mean throw away the facts, right? But I mean that you're not going to just, kind of dump all this into a story like this happened, then this person then married this person, and this happened, and then, okay, no. The only reason that events are actually interesting is because of the way that they affect people. So the reason that it matters that a person, child died, for example, in a family, obviously it matters because the child died, but it also matters because of the effect that it had on the people that were left, right? How did this change them? What choices did they make in their life because of this? That's what matters. When you look at these events, you want to look at the ripples that they created in the family's life. Because that is the interesting thing, right? So it's not just like this happened, and then, this happened. No, it's like this happened, and because this happened, these people were changed. These people got divorced. These people, made whatever move to a different state, to a different country. So write down all those historical events, write down all those things that happen, and then think about which ones really had a huge effect on people. And that's probably what you're going to include in your story. You're not going to include everything that happened because most of it is probably not important. In fact, if you're a memoir writer, if you want to write a memoir, what you really want to focus on are a little certain part of the history. It's not like a chronological long story that includes everything, but maybe it's a certain part of that history. You want to explain why it's important and what happened, the effect that it had on people. So don't worry about all the details unless they really impact the story that you're trying to tell. Typically, in a family story, we're looking at an overall theme of this family and what happened, right? My mom has a friend who lost a daughter when she was a young little baby. I think she was 3 or 4 years old. And she drowned. She fell. The mom went shopping, left the baby and all the kids, I guess, with the father. The little girl fell in the pool and died, and it was tragic. And this affected her like the rest of her life, right? But not only did it affect mom, it affected the marriage. They ended up getting divorced. It affected the other children. One daughter really, I think she had 3 daughters, the one that died, and then she had an older daughter who didn't, really want to have much to do with the family and moved away. Didn't even at the end when her mother was older, she had a relationship, but it was not a very close relationship. Then the other daughter was a super close relationship. She stayed with mom the whole time. That daughter ended up getting cancer and died when she was an adult, but she stayed with mom the whole time, right? So different people in the family reacted differently to this event. So even this one event could be a whole story, right? Because you can extrapolate all the different things that happened because of this one event. So don't think that you have to include everything that happened in these people's lives unless you are looking at maybe historically, great 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 grandpa and so on, and you want to include all the different families, that might be a very long book. But you know, a lot of times it's good to look at one event and how it affected the people around that event. Another thing that you want to think about is, who is the story for? Who is your audience? Are you writing this for a larger audience because you think that it has mass appeal and that it's going to bring in a lot of people because they, you know, you can attract them with the story, they have things to learn from the story? Or do you want to keep it a smaller story that's just going to be read by your family members and your descendants, right? So you want to make sure that you understand who you're writing for first, because it's probably going to change the way that you deliver the story or the way that you write the story, the way you describe people, because your immediate family members, for example, might know who grandma is, but you know, the other people won't, right? So if you're writing it for a large audience, they're not going to know this person. You need to explain a little bit. You need to give a little background. Maybe even for your family members, you'd have to do that. But you know, it helps a lot to understand what your goal is with the story and who you're writing it for. Okay, the other thing that you want to do in addition to really understanding and identifying your audience is setting a goal for the story, which does include the audience, and it includes who's going to read it, right? Who you're writing it for. But it's also like, what is it that you intend to do with the book? Is it to motivate your audience? Is it to inspire them? Is it to inform them of certain events that happened in the past? So, what is your goal for your book, and how do you plan to achieve it, right? Because you're going to achieve it by including certain scenes and certain stories from the past into your book, not all of them. So if your goal is to inspire, then you want to pick those events that in your story that are going to inspire your audience. If your goal is just really to provide details and data, then you can still make that intriguing and interesting, but you're probably going to include more of that in there, like well, this happened at this point, and you know, what are those details? I think one of the most interesting books that I read, like over 20 years ago, so it was a long time ago. I don't remember all the details, but it was about the siege of Leningrad, and it was when the Germans came into Russia and they really surrounded Leningrad, and they were their goal was to starve out the city, right? So that everybody would die, and you know, wouldn't be able to fight. They'd be too weak. They wouldn't have energy. But I remember like the little details from that they did include, you know, stories, little individual stories of family members, but like people resorted to eating, pulling the paper, like what do they call that? Wallpaper. Yeah, wallpaper, from the walls, and eating the paste and creating a soup with it. It's like I still remember this 20 years later. Why? Because it was so horrific, right? Some of the things that they did in order to survive. And this was, you know, a true event. This is something that really happened, right? It wasn't just, it was more historical than it was just a family story. But you can do that with your family stories, where if your goal is to inform, like this is what my family went through, this is what happened during this time period, then you can include more detail. So have a goal, like what is it that you want people to feel and achieve and understand from the story that you're telling. But one of the things that I do want to warn you about, though, is that if your goal is to inform about a certain event, just remember that, again, we want to make an intriguing story, right? So readers are not all that interested in like dates and those type of facts. The reason I remember the story about the paste and the wall that they were eating is because it was so horrific, because it was a story that they told within that book, right? Of how people survived. So what do people like? Readers like conflict. They like stories. They like interesting things like that. Not so much the dates. They're not going to remember. Like I can't tell you exactly the date of when this was happening, but I can tell you, you know, the emotions that they wrote about in that book, and the experiences that a lot of the people had. Because again, because it was just it made a huge impression on me, because who wants to live through that kind of stuff, right? Who wants to be reduced to eating little things that you know, that is non-food, right? So remember that readers like conflict, they like drama, they like those kind of things, and that is what they're going to remember. So even if it's to inform, you want to not include just a bunch of data because they're not going to remember that and it's not going to keep their attention. Something else that you might want to think about is who is your main protagonist in your story. So even though it's a family history, it could be a group, right? It could be the story is the whole family, right? Because things impact the whole family. But a lot of times it's like there's this one character, right, in your story that that you're kind of following and that you're telling the story of. It could be a great grandparent, it could be the grandparent, it could be your parents, right? It could be somebody, and the things that happen, the events that happen do impact the whole family, but typically it's one person. So sometimes people write like about an alcoholic parent, for example. Well, how does that, alcoholism affect everybody in the family? So think about that, like who is your main character? What is it that you want to say? What is it about the events that happened around this character that affected the family? So maybe think about that. So with me, for example, with Let Us Begin, it was really my father's story. Now I could have gone back in time. I could have said, okay, well, I'm going to start this story. It's a story about immigrants and immigrations and going to new places. Well, I could go back to my great grandfather who left France and immigrated to Argentina, and then his, son stayed there, but my dad left Argentina and immigrated to the United States. It could be, I could have followed all these men, right, and shown the effect of immigration. But I chose to focus on one, right, just to focus on my father and his immigration to the United States, and the events and the things that happened and how his decisions affected his family. So you want to choose that one character because it makes the story more compelling if you're just focused on one rather than, a whole line of people through, hundreds of years. So getting over some of the other blocks, right, of not knowing what to do or where to start or committing all the time. Think about really get excited about writing because you are documenting a family history. You are including things in your story, right, that are important, like maybe family traditions or things that I know I had a good time adding that to my story, of having some of the traditions that were Argentine that my father would follow on his own, and then with us as with his kids. So, that just be excited about being able to share things like that and being able to document those things so they're not forgotten, so that somebody in the future can look at that and go, wow, I didn't know that this is something that my family did, or maybe their family is still doing this. We still celebrate Christmas the same way as my grandfather did, for example, right? Not my case, but I mean, I'm just using it as an example. Also, something else I recommend is to determine like the type of publication that you want. It doesn't necessarily have to be a book. So a lot of times we think we want to write a book, but you could do this in a different way that maybe is less intimidating. Maybe you can gain readership in a different way. So maybe you're doing like a series of blogs based on your family history. Maybe you're doing a bunch of short stories or a bunch of poems. So how else could you do it? Could you document things maybe without a book? Or maybe you start that way and then eventually you move on to binding it, creating an entire book, right? So think about the best way to do it for you, for your family members, or for whoever your readers are going to be. And then lastly, I recommend that you learn to write well, which might seem obvious, like, okay, I should be able to write well in order to write. Don't worry about writing poorly at first, right? So you want to get down your story, you want to get your rough draft done. But you also want, especially if you want to publish your story, learn about writing, read books about writing, take classes maybe on how to write well, because it's important. You're going to feel more confident if you're writing well, you're creating interesting stories. Like how do I create this story or that seems kind of boring and bring some drama to it, bring some interest to it. Learn how to do that. To take some fiction classes, even if you're not writing fiction, because it helps you to learn how to create a scene, how to create a story. Because even nonfiction, even memoirs, it's storytelling. Take as much time as you need to edit your story for correctness, for details, adding details, for adding sensory information about how people feel, what they see, what they think, right? How certain foods taste if you're adding, food to your stories. So take your time to write a good story, and that is going to, because again, what I originally started saying at the beginning of this video was that how to document or how to write your story, but make it interesting, how to make it so that readers want to read it. And one of them is just being a good storyteller, being a good writer, editing your story, taking the time to add the details, taking the time maybe to have other people read it. So you can have people in your family read it and tell you, yeah, this is right, this is not right, this doesn't sound good, you're losing me here, right? Anything that can help you to edit your story and make it a stronger story. So if this is something that you have been thinking about for a long time, I encourage you to do it. Just give it a try. It's a really rewarding experience, and then you will leave this again for future generations that they can go back and they can read it and they get to know some of the things, some of the stories that you know, and some of the stories that maybe people around you know that future your kids, your grandkids don't know about, but they can or they will be. They'll be able to connect to your ancestors through your stories. So I encourage you to give it a try. And I hope you like this. If you enjoyed it, then please hit the like button, hit the share button, subscribe to the channel, and come back next week to get some more writing tips from me. See you later.